2 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin began his vicious assault on the country of Ukraine, as well as its people. Bob Thomas is an American expat who made Ukraine his home for the last almost 6 years. That is until Russian forces began shelling civilian targets throughout the country. When those air raid sirens went off, Bob and nearly 2 million others knew it was time to get out. About a week and a half ago, he was in Ukraine trying to get out of harm's way. He's here tonight with his harrowing story of escape from the country that he calls his second home. Would you please welcome him to our show and back home to the USA? Welcome, Bob Thomas. Bob, it must be a little different. A week and a half ago, you were literally trying to get your life out of harm's way, not sure if you would ever see the USA again. Would you survive all that Putin was doing? And now you're sitting on stage in Nashville, Tennessee, on television, talking about it. So it's been kind of a whirlwind, huh?
Of course.
So I want you to take us through what you went through in those days leading up to Putin's invasion and then the process of getting out.
Leading up to the invasion, there was so much conflicting information about whether this was real. And on the ground in Ukraine, lots of people really didn't believe it. Even Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said, don't overreact. And most people felt as though any real increase in hostility would be the Donbass region. That's the far eastern tip, Lugansk, Donetsk, which is already very pro-Russian anyway. But nobody believed, really very few people in Ukraine believed anything would come to Kiev. And because, as you mentioned, I made it my home for 5 years, I wasn't eager to leave, although I was watching closely. But the first morning, the 24th, Thursday morning, 2 weeks ago, I heard the most deafening air raid sirens that, well, this is real, okay?
Yeah.
And that day I spent time on the phone talking to people I knew who had cars, former students. I teach English, and I asked them, how do you feel about a road trip? Poland, maybe. And they, no, the roads are blocked. Russian tanks are stopping people. And later that night, I met with a Norwegian friend who visits Ukraine periodically, who told me him and his girlfriend and girlfriend's family, we had 2 cars, and they were driving out to Lviv and then to Poland the next day. I said, maybe you have an extra seat in that car. Mm. He said, well, it's not my car, but I'm kind of got some influence here, so maybe I will try to push that and see if they will agree. And he called me later and said, you're in, be at the apartment by 6:30. And so Friday morning, the 25th, 2 weeks ago today, I walked 30 minutes to his apartment, pulling my 60-pound bag and with my backpack before curfew was open because it was, you're not supposed to be on the street. And it was that morning that the morning that I heard the air raid sirens, I didn't hear any bombs. But that morning, walking to their place, I heard it was thunder. I really can't say I was dodging shells, yeah. But I heard the thunder in the distance and got there plenty of time and loaded up the cars, and there were 7 people in 2 cars. And as soon as we got the cars loaded, the air raid sirens started right at 7 a.m. And Harold, my Norwegian friend, he's a former Norwegian military guy he's combat ready. He told all of the people, we're leaving today at 7 or we're staying through all of it. And so the air raid sirens went off and all the girls, oh, we're gonna stay. We gotta go in shelter. And he said, okay, if we're staying for good. And they said, okay, no, we'll go. 5 hours, we got on the road, and 5 hours later, we heard the news that Russian ground troops were in Kiev. So we really got out right ahead of them. So, and then took kind of back roads, not the straight, smooth route, because he was picking the southern, slightly longer route to get out for safety reasons. So that's the beginning of the trip.
Were you afraid for your life? I mean, were you conscious of that Putin had a couple 100,000 troops out there going after folks like you? So were you aware of that?
Yes and no. The first day, everybody heard that they were bombing airstrips and military installations, basically extremely strategic targets. So civilians evacuating are kind of a low risk, but you don't want to be on the streets when the troops come, and that's always the ticking clock. Do we leave and get there? Because if there's going to be an invasion, it will be on the ground, and that's going to be a very bad time to be there. So I was worried then. But there's something else I learned about myself and dealing with crisis, because I've never dealt with that much before, and that is that when you start thinking that, and I don't mean to sound like a war veteran, but I do know what it feels like to know you don't think about too much. You think about the next step only, and that was, we need to get out of Kiev, we need to get to Lviv, we need to get to Poland, and then we'll figure out the rest. We didn't go, that plan did not stick because the other people in this party decided to go a southern route, but I went to Lviv anyway and stayed at a friend's apartment for a few days, waiting for the right time out. That's when I was in touch with Johnny, who you had put me in touch with.
Yeah, a guy named Johnny Daniels, an Israeli friend of mine that was going to try to help you. I just want to let our audience know, because they don't know who Johnny is, so we got to tell them.
Johnny?
Yeah, you know that Johnny.
Different Johnny. Yeah. So, but yeah, he gave me some valuable intel, we'll call it. You know, where to go, where not to go. I didn't follow all of it, but he gave me useful information.
I think all of us have been deeply moved by the people of Ukraine, their resilience and their resistance to Vladimir Putin. I think he thought he was just going to march in and they'd all surrender, and that has not happened. Were you surprised by that sense of resolve that we've seen from them?
I am shocked. I am surprised and just inspired, yes. Because I, like many, really thought that the first morning I heard air raid sirens, and then the next morning with bombs, that Ukraine would just say, okay, never mind, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And they haven't done that. God bless them.
How much of that is because of the president, Zelensky, who has shown a remarkable sense of courage and grit?
It might be significant, because up until this, the opinion I detected on the street, and I teach English there, so I talk to a lot of people this way and get to know them personally and how they think. He was not positively viewed. He kind of was pictured maybe a little bit not as a serious president.
Yeah.
And he came through. He came through, said, I don't need a ride, I need ammo.
Yeah.
And
that may be the quote of the century.
It could be.
I think it is.
And he delivered a quote to British Parliament, essentially channeling Churchill. You know, we're going to fight in the streets and in the forest and in the fields. And so wow.
And Bob, that's exactly what's happened. The Ukrainian men have gathered weapons. I mean, from some of them are teenagers all the way up to some older retired people. And they said, give me a gun. I'm ready to fight these Russians.
And some of them are there's internet sites and networks, you know, Telegram chat bots and whatnot, where the people are part of, and they share recipes for Molotov cocktails, and they're in their apartments making homemade bombs to throw at any invaders on the streets. I know people doing this.
So are you in touch with friends and folks that you worked with and knew and taught in Ukraine?
You know, I've been in touch with my doctors. A year ago, I had a very serious heart condition. That's not really heart, but the aorta. And my saintly, God-sent surgical staff is still working all day and all night, patching up people, plus fixing their normal aorta people. I've been in touch with them, and they are just, you know, I offered to continue our lessons whenever it was good for them, and the head surgeon explained, it's like, well, for now, probably we need to take a break, but as soon as Ukraine wins, we will resume.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that.
It's like,
what an encouragement and inspiration to all of us. And I wonder if this were where the United States was under attack like that, and somebody was viciously and ruthlessly coming in and killing civilians, would that be our response, or would we just put our mask on and say, okay, we surrender? I don't know.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is.
And I think maybe Ukraine lives under that boot, that fear, that history of having been invaded and controlled before against their will.
Yeah.
And I think that part of that, it's not active in their everyday thinking, but I think it's in their cultural DNA that we're not going to let this happen again, sort of the anti-Holodomor.
You know, Ukrainian people that I have known feel very, I would say, disconnected from the old Soviet Union, and they resented that whole connection that they had. They loved that they were made independent and were able to be free. And they've had their problems, corruption and other things, but at least they ran their own government, and it was a Ukrainian culture, not a Russian culture. Is that what's driving this sense of we will not surrender?
I'm not really sure I can pinpoint that. And, you know, I have visited Ukraine before I actually moved there 5 years ago. And they have not been total anti-Russia the whole time. They speak Russian. The eastern half of the country is much more pro-Russian. They're still independent Ukrainians. The farthest eastern tip, Donbass, is maybe different. Mm-hmm. I mean, they went 90+% to Yanukovych in 2 elections, which is the Putin president. But I think, yeah, there is a culture of deep in their DNA. It's just like in our DNA: give me liberty or give me death. Mm-hmm. The tree of liberty must be watered with by the blood of the patriots. These kind of things are way back in our mind. They're not here now because we're warm and we're comfortable and we don't hear bombs and bullets. But maybe if we did, those things would come up. And I think maybe that's what happened in Ukraine.
Well, I know that you are a strong believer, and you have relied upon prayer and asking God to get you out. Would you go back?
Absolutely, if it's safe. I'm too, you know, my medical condition makes me a little bit too fragile to go back and fight or be active and run away from bombs and bullets. But if it becomes stable again, I really, really love Ukraine. The culture, the people are just wonderful. I love it.
Bob, thank you for being here. It is an honor to have you. It's also refreshing to hear someone who gives us a firsthand understanding of what's been going on, because quite frankly, I don't know to trust the news media a lot these days, so I can bring you here and trust you, and thank you for telling us your incredible story.